Disney and DreamWorks have created some really interesting villains, but not all of them are that scary. In this video, I'm gonna rank the top 10 villains from Disney and DreamWorks who aren't exactly intimidating. At number 10, Captain Hook. Captain Hook is one of those villains who can never seem to catch a break. Instead of being genuinely scary, he's more of a joke because of how often he messes up. His main goal is to get revenge on Peter Pan, but every time he tries, things go wrong in the funniest ways. He's always being chased by that ticking crocodile, which freaks him out to the point where he loses all his composure. That fear shows that deep down, he's not as tough as he likes to act. Then there's his dramatic way of talking and his clumsy sword fighting, which make him come across as silly rather than threatening. Even the Lost Boys, who are just kids, manage to outsmart him on a regular basis. With all his blunders and over-the-top reactions, Hook is more pitiful than dangerous. You can't help but laugh at him, especially when he's running away from his own fears. At number 9, Gaston. Gaston is the classic example of a guy who thinks way too highly of himself. He walks around town acting like he's the strongest, best-looking man ever, and he can't understand why Belle isn't falling for him. His confidence is so over the top that it becomes funny instead of intimidating. Every time he tries to impress Belle, it just comes off as ridiculous, and it's clear he's more in love with himself than anyone else. His arrogance is matched by his vanity. He can't pass a mirror without admiring his reflection. And let's not forget about his sidekick, LeFou, who constantly praises him and makes him look even more foolish. Gaston might try to act tough and manly, but when you break it down, he's more of a joke. His obsession with winning Belle's heart, no matter how badly he goes about it, just makes him look desperate. Despite his strength, he never comes across as a real threat because his inflated ego makes it hard to take him seriously. At number 8, Kruella Devil. Kruella Devil is definitely one of the more memorable Disney villains, but not exactly for being terrifying. Her obsession with fashion drives her to do some pretty awful things, like trying to steal a bunch of puppies just so she can turn them into fur coats. That's definitely sinister, but it's hard to take her seriously when you look at her overall personality. Cruella is incredibly dramatic. She's always throwing fits, waving her cigarette holder around, and speaking in this exaggerated theatrical way. Then there's her appearance, her half-black half-white hair, her outrageous fur coats, and her wild fashion sense. Instead of making her scary, these things turn her into almost a cartoon version of a villain. She's more eccentric and over-the-top than menacing, which makes her a character you can laugh at rather than fear. Even when she's chasing after the puppies, she's more chaotic and frantic than genuinely threatening. So while her intentions are definitely dark, her execution is so ridiculous that you end up being more entertained than scared. At number 7, the Queen of Hearts. The Queen of Hearts may have a pretty terrifying catchphrase, "off with their heads," but in reality, she's more funny than frightening. She's constantly losing her temper over the smallest things, throwing childish tantrums whenever something doesn't go her way. Her reactions are so overblown that it's hard to see her as a real threat. Instead, she feels like a big loud character who's more about making a scene than actually being dangerous. Plus, the world she lives in, Wonderland, is full of nonsense and whimsy, which makes everything, including her, feel more like a dream than something truly scary. Her court of cards and ridiculous rules make her seem less like a ruler to be feared and more like a comedic figure who's just throwing around empty threats. While she's certainly loud and demanding, her lack of real power and her tantrum-filled behavior make her more amusing than anything else. At number 6, Hades. Hades, being the god of the underworld, should be one of the most intimidating villains out there, right? But in Hercules, he's more of a sarcastic jokester than a scary god of death. He's got a lot of power, sure, but the way he's portrayed in the movie makes him hard to take seriously as a true villain. His sharp, witty humor and constant one-liners make him more entertaining than terrifying. Even when he's plotting to overthrow Zeus and take over Mount Olympus, Hades always manages to throw in some snarky comment or have a funny outburst when things don't go his way. And let's be honest, his temper tantrums, where his flaming hair turns red hot, are more comical than threatening. His interactions with his minions, Pain and Panic, are full of slapstick humor, and his frustrations just make him look more like a stressed-out boss than a powerful god. In the end, it's his sarcastic personality and comedic moments that make him memorable, but not exactly intimidating. At number 5, Lord Farquaad. Lord Farquaad might have big ambitions, but his small stature and even bigger ego turn him into a joke more than anything else. He's obsessed with becoming king, and his whole plan revolves around marrying Princess Fiona to make it happen. But everything about Farquaad is over the top and absurd, which takes away from any real sense of danger. For one, his ridiculously tall castle is way too big for someone his size, which immediately sets him up as a character to laugh at. He's incredibly vain, always worried about his appearance and power, but his tiny stature and huge sense of entitlement make him look foolish. His interactions with Shrek and Donkey, especially when they poke fun at his height, just highlight how ridiculous he really is. While he tries to act tough and commanding, Lord Farquaad's vanity and overblown personality make him more of a laughable antagonist than a true threat to anyone. At number 4, Fairy Godmother. At first glance, the Fairy Godmother in Shrek 2 seems like your typical sweet fairy godmother. She's all smiles, charm, and sparkle. But as the story unfolds, you quickly realize she's got a much darker side. Sure, she has powerful magic at her disposal, but what really stands out is her manipulative nature. She's not above using her magic to get what she wants, which is to have her son Prince Charming end up with Fiona and take over the kingdom. But despite her scheming, the fairy godmother's personality keeps her from being truly scary. She's so melodramatic, especially during her musical number, Holding Out for a Hero, where she belts out the song like she's in a concert instead of trying to execute a master plan. Her flashy performances and larger-than-life attitude make her more of a spectacle than a real villain. While she's definitely ruthless and ambitious, the way she goes about it, singing, scheming, and overreacting, makes her character entertaining and fun to watch rather than terrifying. At number 3, Victor Quartermain. Victor Quartermain is the kind of villain who thinks he's much smarter and more dangerous than he actually is. In Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, he's introduced as this overconfident, pompous hunter who's convinced he's the hero of the story. His main goal is to marry Lady Tottingham, but he keeps getting tangled up in ridiculous situations with Wallace and Gromit. Victor's exaggerated sense of superiority is what makes him funny. He's always bragging and puffing out his chest, even when he's failing miserably at his attempts to catch the were-rabbit. His bumbling villainy and clumsy efforts make him more of a joke than a real threat. The humor comes from his over-the-top antics, like wildly firing his gun or making grand dramatic speeches, rather than any actual malice. In the end, Victor is just a pompous buffoon whose self-importance makes him more amusing than intimidating. At number 2, Captain Shantel Dubois. Captain Shantel Dubois is introduced as this relentless no-nonsense animal control officer who has one thing on her mind: capturing Alex the lion. But despite her determination, she quickly becomes more of a source of comedy than a real threat. Her pursuit of Alex and the gang is full of slapstick moments that make her feel like an exaggerated cartoon character. Whether she's scaling walls with ease or performing acrobatic stunts, it's all done with such dramatic flair that you can't help but laugh. Her over-the-top personality makes her seem less like a serious villain and more like a parody of one. Dubois is constantly breaking into song or delivering lines with a level of theatricality that makes her larger than life, but in a funny, ridiculous way. Instead of being scared of her, the audience is more likely to find her entertaining, especially as her chase scenes become more and more absurd. By the end of the movie, her eccentric behavior and dramatic style contribute to the overall comedic tone, making her more of a cartoonish antagonist than a real danger. At number 1, Humpty Alexander Dumpty. Humpty Alexander Dumpty, or just Humpty Dumpty, might have started out as Puss's childhood friend, but his jealousy and eventual betrayal set him up as the film's main antagonist. Even with all that though, Humpty is far from intimidating. His backstory, which explains why he became so bitter, adds a layer of complexity to his character, making him someone you can understand, maybe even sympathize with. Instead of being purely evil, he's more of a tragic character whose feelings of abandonment and jealousy drive his actions. Plus, his appearance, a giant talking egg in a golden suit, makes it really hard to see him as a menacing figure. His interactions with Puss are full of humor, and while he does some pretty shady things, there's always a sense that he's not completely bad. His quirky design and all the funny moments throughout the film further reduce any sense of fear. In the end, you don't really view Humpty as a scary villain but rather as a complicated character who's made some poor choices, with more of a goofy, humorous side than a genuinely threatening one. Now, don't get me wrong, every villain on this list is fantastic in their own way. Even though they might not be very intimidating, they're still great characters.